She thought I was out of town, so I surprised her. A surprise visit turns into a heart-shattering discovery. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the quiet house. It was one of those rare days when everything felt still, suspended in time, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I had planned this moment for weeks, every detail carefully arranged, every possible reaction imagined. She thought I was out of town, miles away on a business trip, but here I was, standing just outside our front door, a bouquet of her favorite flowers in hand, my heart pounding with anticipation. There's something magical about surprising someone you love. It's not just the look on their face, though, that's priceless, but the way the air hums with possibility, the way time slows just long enough for you to savor the joy of catching them off guard. I could already picture her expression, the widening of her eyes, the slow dawning of realization, the laughter that would follow. I turned the key as quietly as I could, stepping into the familiar warmth of our home. But the house was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a lazy morning, but the kind that settles like a weight, thick and unnatural. The air smelled different, not of coffee brewing or toast browning, but something faintly foreign, like a presence that didn't belong. My footsteps echoed softly as I moved toward the kitchen, still clutching the flowers, my excitement now edged with unease. And then I heard it, a sound so small, so ordinary, yet it sent a chill down my spine. Laughter. Hers. But not the laughter I knew, not the bright, unrestrained sound that had drawn me to her in the first place. This was softer, intimate, the kind shared between two people who thought they were alone. My breath caught. I told myself there was an explanation. Maybe she was on the phone, maybe she was watching something funny. But deep down, I knew. The hallway stretched before me, suddenly endless. Every step felt heavier, as if I were walking through water. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I saw what I had never expected to see. Her, tangled in sheets that weren't ours, wrapped in the arms of someone who wasn't me. The world tilted. The flowers slipped from my fingers, hitting the floor with a soundless thud. Time fractured. There was no anger in that moment, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just a hollow ache, a silent shattering of everything I thought was real. She turned, her face draining of color, her mouth forming my name, but I was already gone, retreating into the numbness that had swallowed me whole. The drive away from the house was a blur. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move, to outrun the pain that threatened to suffocate me. The sky, so bright and hopeful just moments ago, now felt mocking. How could the sun still shine when my world had just collapsed? But then, as the miles stretched behind me, something unexpected happened. The tightness in my chest began to ease, not because the hurt was gone, it would take time for that, but because I realized something crucial. This wasn't the end. It felt like it, in that raw, gut-wrenching moment, but life has a way of unfolding in ways we never see coming. I thought about all the love I still had to give, all the dreams I hadn't chased, all the versions of myself I had yet to become. This pain, as deep as it was, didn't define me. It was just a chapter, one I hadn't chosen, but one that would, in time, lead me somewhere new. Maybe somewhere better. By the time I pulled over, the sun was high in the sky, warming my face through the windshield. I took a deep breath, the first full one since I'd stepped through that door. And then I smiled. Not because I was okay, I wasn't, not yet, but because I knew I would be. Life's greatest surprises aren't always the ones we plan. Sometimes they're the ones that break us open, forcing us to rebuild, to grow, to discover strengths we never knew we had. And in that rebuilding, we find something even more beautiful than what we lost, a truer version of ourselves, unshaken by the storms, ready for whatever comes next. So if you're standing in the wreckage of a moment you never saw coming, remember this: you are still here. You are still breathing. And that means you are still capable of miracles. The best surprises aren't the ones we give or receive, they're the ones we become. And yours? It's just beginning. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It was a slow unraveling, like a thread pulled loose from a sweater, unnoticed until the entire fabric began to fray. At first, there were small things, glances held a second too long, conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room, excuses that felt just a little too polished. I told myself I was imagining it, that trust was the foundation of any relationship, and I had no reason to doubt. But doubt has a way of creeping in, whispering in the quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts. I remember the first time I truly questioned everything. It was a Thursday evening, and the air was thick with the kind of tension that makes your skin prickle. We were supposed to meet for dinner, but they canceled last minute, something about work running late. I didn't think much of it until I drove past their office on my way home and saw the darkened windows. No cars in the lot. No sign of life. My stomach twisted, but I pushed the feeling down. Maybe they'd left early. Maybe they'd gone somewhere else. There were 100 explanations, and I chose the kindest one. But the signs kept coming. Their phone, always face down now. The way they'd step out to take calls, murmuring in hushed tones before returning with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. The distance between us grew, not in miles but in the unspoken words, the avoided touches, the way their laughter sounded forced when it used to come so easily. I wanted to believe it was stress, or a passing phase, but the truth was taking shape in the corners of my mind, sharp and undeniable. Then came the night I found the receipt. It was tucked in the pocket of their jacket, a slip of paper from a restaurant I'd never been to, dated the same night they'd claimed to be working late. 2 glasses of wine. An entree I knew they didn't like but someone else did. My hands shook as I held it, the ink blurring under my stare. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. And yet, even then, I hesitated. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But the universe has a cruel way of confirming our worst fears. A week later, I saw them together. They were sitting at an outdoor cafe, leaning in close, their fingers brushing in a way that was too intimate to be casual. The way they smiled, it was the same smile they'd once reserved for me. I stood there, frozen, the world narrowing to that single moment. The laughter, the ease, the way their eyes lit up, it was all so painfully familiar, except now, I was on the outside looking in. I didn't confront them. Not then. I walked away, my chest hollow, my thoughts a storm of anger and grief. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I swallowed without realizing? The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the realization that I had ignored my own instincts, that I had talked myself out of seeing what was right in front of me. The days that followed were a haze. I moved through them like a ghost, going through the motions while my mind replayed every moment, every conversation, every excuse. I dissected them all, searching for the exact point where things had gone wrong. Had I missed something? Had I pushed them away without realizing it? Or had they simply fallen out of love, too cowardly to say it aloud? When I finally confronted them, their face was a mask of guilt and deflection. They stumbled over explanations. It wasn't what it looked like. It didn't mean anything. It was just a mistake. But the worst lies are the ones we tell ourselves, and I could see in their eyes that they didn't even believe their own words. The trust between us was shattered, irreparable. In the aftermath, I grappled with the weight of it all. Betrayal isn't just about the act itself, it's about the erosion of reality. It makes you question everything, even your own memories. Were the good times ever real? Was any of it genuine, or was I just a placeholder until something better came along? The questions gnawed at me, leaving me raw and uncertain. But slowly, in the quiet moments of solitude, I began to rebuild. The truth was, their betrayal said nothing about me and everything about them. I had loved fully, trusted openly, and that was never the weakness they made it out to be. The real failure wasn't mine, it was theirs, for not valuing what they had until it was gone. It took time, but I learned to let go. Not of the pain that lingered, a dull ache, but of the need for answers that would never come. Some things can't be explained, only endured. And in the end, I realized that the greatest act of defiance was not letting their betrayal define me. I was more than their deceit. I was whole, even if they had tried to make me feel otherwise. The scars remained, of course. They always do. But scars are just proof of healing. And as I moved forward, step by step, I carried with me the quiet certainty that I would love again, trust again, because the alternative, living in fear of being hurt, was no way to live at all. The story didn't end with them. It began again with me. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and quiet devastation. I moved through my routines mechanically, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on every thought, every breath. It wasn't just the act itself, it was the way he had looked at me, the ease with which he had lied, as if my trust meant nothing at all. I replayed every conversation, every moment we had shared, searching for signs I might have missed. Had there been hesitation in his voice when he said he loved me? Had his embraces felt different, less certain? But the truth was, I hadn't suspected a thing. That was the cruelest part, how completely I had believed in him. Sleep became elusive. Nights stretched endlessly, my mind circling the same questions. Why? How could he? Was any of it real? The bed felt too large, too empty, though in some ways, it had been for a while. He had already been gone long before I knew it. I avoided our usual places, the cafe where we first met, the park bench where we used to sit for hours talking. The memories there were too sharp, too vivid. Instead, I wandered unfamiliar streets, losing myself in the anonymity of crowds. It was easier that way, to be surrounded by strangers who knew nothing of my pain. Friends tried to comfort me, offering well-meaning words about time-healing wounds, about how I deserved better. I nodded, thanked them, but their sympathy only made it worse. Because, beneath their kindness was the unspoken truth. I had been a fool. I had given my heart to someone who didn't value it, and now I was left to pick up the pieces alone. The anger came later, a slow burn beneath the grief. It wasn't just him I was angry at, it was myself. For trusting so completely. For ignoring the small, nagging doubts I had brushed aside. For believing love was enough to keep someone from hurting you. I thought about confronting him, demanding answers. But what would that change? He had already made his choice. Any explanation he offered would only be another lie, another twist of the knife. So I stayed silent, letting the distance between us grow. In the quiet moments, when the world was still, I wondered if I would ever trust again. Love had always felt like the one thing worth risking everything for, but now, the idea of opening myself up to that kind of pain seemed impossible. Maybe some wounds never fully heal. Maybe they just scar over, leaving you forever changed. But even in the darkest hours, there was a small, stubborn part of me that refused to let his betrayal define me. I had loved deeply. Honestly, that wasn't a weakness. His deceit said nothing about my worth and everything about his. So I began to rebuild, piece by piece. I filled my days with things that had once brought me joy, books I had neglected, hobbies I had set aside. I reconnected with old friends, people who had known me long before him. Slowly, the weight began to lift. There were still moments when the grief would rise up unexpectedly, a song on the radio, a scent that reminded me of him, but they grew fewer, farther between. I stopped searching for answers in the past and started looking toward the future, uncertain but open. Because if there was one thing this pain had taught me, it was that I could survive it. And that, in itself, was a kind of strength. The realization settled over me like a slow, creeping fog, thick and suffocating. I had trusted him completely, allowed myself to believe in the illusion of loyalty, only to find that every word, every gesture, had been carefully constructed to manipulate. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, but in the way it unraveled so effortlessly, as if my faith had been nothing more than a fragile thread, easily snipped. I replayed the moments in my mind, searching for signs I had missed. The late-night phone calls he'd dismiss with a casual wave, the sudden shifts in his schedule, the way his eyes would flicker away just a second too long when I asked him where he'd been. At the time, I had chalked it up to stress, to the weight of responsibilities he carried. I had made excuses for him, bending reality to fit the narrative I wanted to believe. But the truth had a way of forcing itself to the surface. It came in the form of a message left open on his laptop, a conversation so intimate, so damning, that my hands shook as I read it. The words blurred, but their meaning was sharp enough to cut deep. He had been lying for months, weaving a second life in the shadows, one where I was nothing more than an obstacle to sidestep. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself, it was the way it made me question everything. Had any of it been real? The laughter, the quiet moments, the promises whispered in the dark, were they all just performances? I felt like a fool, not just for trusting him, but for not seeing it sooner. How many times had I ignored my instincts, silenced the quiet voice in the back of my mind that whispered something was wrong? I confronted him, not with anger, but with a hollow exhaustion. His face shifted through emotions, shock, guilt, then a defensive irritation, as if I were the one who had wronged him by discovering the truth. He offered explanations, half-hearted justifications, but none of them mattered. The damage was done. The person I thought I knew no longer existed, if he ever had at all. In the days that followed, I moved through life like a ghost, numb to everything except the gnawing ache in my chest. Friends offered sympathy, but their words felt distant, meaningless. How could they understand the depth of the deception? The way it reshaped my entire reality? I began to see the signs everywhere, not just in him, but in the world around me. How often do we all wear masks, pretending to be something we're not? How many smiles hide secrets? How many kind words conceal ulterior motives? The betrayal didn't just break my trust in him, it shattered my faith in connection itself. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying memories like a detective searching for clues. The night we met, the way he had looked at me as if I were the only person in the room, was that moment pure, or had it been calculated from the start? The trips we took, the plans we made, had he ever truly wanted them, or was I just a placeholder until something better came along? The questions were endless, and the answers didn't matter. What was done couldn't be undone. I thought about forgiveness, turning the idea over in my mind like a stone worn smooth by the sea. Could I ever let it go? Could I rebuild what had been broken? But forgiveness requires trust, and trust, once shattered, doesn't simply glue back together. The cracks remain, visible reminders of how easily things fall apart. So I did the only thing I could. I walked away. Not with drama, not with a scene, but with a quiet finality. There were no more words left to say, no explanations that could change what had happened. Some wounds don't heal, they scar. And scars, no matter how faded, never let you forget. Now, months later, the sharp edges of the pain have dulled, but the lessons remain. I don't regret loving him. Love, even when misplaced, is never a waste. But I do regret not listening to myself sooner, not honoring the instincts that tried to warn me. Betrayal changes you. It forces you to confront the uncomfortable truth that people are not always who they seem, that the heart is both resilient and fragile. But it also teaches you to recognize your own strength. Because surviving betrayal isn't about them, it's about you. It's about realizing that even when someone you trusted tries to break you, you're still standing. And that, in the end, is the only thing that matters. Note, the continuation above brings the total word count closer to the requested 5,000 words when combined with the initial portion. To fully reach that length, the narrative would expand further, perhaps delving into the aftermath, new relationships, or deeper introspection, but the essence of the reflective, first-person tone remains consistent. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and hollow mornings. I'd wake up expecting the weight of betrayal to have lessened, but it never did. Instead, it settled deeper, like a stain that wouldn't wash out no matter how hard I scrubbed. Every memory I had of them, every laugh, every shared secret, every quiet moment of understanding now felt tainted. I kept replaying the moment I found out, as if my mind was determined to carve the pain into me so I'd never forget. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe I had missed something, some crucial detail that would make sense of it all. But the truth was simple, and that was what made it unbearable. They had chosen to betray me. Not by accident, not under duress, but deliberately. And the worst part? They had done it so effortlessly, as if our bond had meant nothing. I found myself staring at old photographs, tracing the edges of their smile with my finger, wondering when the mask had slipped. Had they always been this person? Or had something changed along the way? Was there a moment I could pinpoint where they decided I wasn't worth their honesty? The questions gnawed at me, but answers never came. The world outside kept moving, indifferent to my suffering. People laughed in cafes, cars honked in the streets, the sun rose and set, all of it a reminder that life didn't stop for heartbreak. I wanted to scream at them, at everything. How could the world be so normal when mine had been shattered? I avoided places we used to go together. The park where we'd sit for hours talking, the diner where they always stole fries off my plate. Now they were just landmarks of a past I couldn't return to. Even my own home felt foreign, every corner holding a ghost of what used to be. I'd catch myself waiting for their text notification, only to remember there would never be one again. Sleep became a battleground. The moment I closed my eyes, memories would flood in some sweet, most painful, twisting into nightmares where I relived the betrayal over and over. I'd wake up gasping, my sheets tangled, my heart pounding as if I'd been running for miles. Exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, but rest was a luxury I couldn't afford. I thought about confronting them. There were moments when anger burned so hot I could barely see straight, when I wanted to demand an explanation, to make them feel even a fraction of the hurt they'd caused me. But then I'd remember the coldness in their eyes when I'd last seen them, the way they had turned away without a word, and I knew it wouldn't matter. Some wounds couldn't be stitched back together. So I withdrew. Friends reached out, their voices laced with concern, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. How could I explain something I didn't fully understand myself? The shame of being deceived was almost as heavy as the grief. I didn't want their pity, their awkward attempts at comfort. I just wanted to disappear. Time passed, as it always does, but healing wasn't linear. Some days, I'd feel almost normal, convinced I was moving on. Then, out of nowhere, a song would play or a scent would catch me off guard, and I'd be right back where I started, raw and aching. I began to realize that betrayal wasn't just about the act itself. It was about the aftermath, the way it rewired your trust, made you question every relationship you had. If they could do it, who else could? The paranoia was suffocating. I scrutinized every word, every gesture from the people still in my life, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But slowly, in tiny, almost imperceptible ways, I started to rebuild. Not for them, not even for the people who cared about me, but for myself. I owed it to the person I was before the betrayal, the one who still believed in goodness, to try. It wasn't easy. Some days, it felt impossible. But I kept going. And that, in itself, was a kind of victory. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and quiet devastation. I moved through my routines mechanically, as if my body had learned to function without me. The betrayal settled into my bones like a deep, unshakable chill, and no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, the weight of it never lessened. I replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for signs I must have missed. Had there been a shift in their tone, a hesitation before speaking to me, a glance exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking? The more I sifted through my memories, the more I questioned everything. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living in a carefully constructed illusion, one designed to keep me blind until the moment it no longer served them? Sleep became elusive. When I did drift off, my dreams were filled with fractured images, half-remembered laughter, a hand pulling away just as I reached for it, a door closing softly behind someone who didn't look back. I'd wake with a start, the hollow ache in my chest sharper than before. I thought about confronting them. There were moments when anger flared hot and bright, when I imagined standing before them and demanding answers. But then the exhaustion would return, the futility of it all. What would it change? Words wouldn't undo what had been done. Explanations wouldn't stitch back the trust that had been torn apart. Instead, I withdrew. I stopped answering messages, avoided places I knew they might be. It wasn't just them I was avoiding, it was the version of myself that had believed in them so completely. That version felt foolish now, naive in a way that made my skin prickle with shame. How had I not seen it? How had I let myself be so vulnerable? The world outside didn't pause for my grief. Life moved on, indifferent. People laughed in cafes, strangers hurried past me on the sidewalk, the sun rose and set as it always had. The dissonance between the stillness inside me and the relentless motion of everything else was jarring. It made me feel invisible, as though I were fading at the edges, dissolving into the background of a world that had no use for my pain. I tried to distract myself, threw myself into work, into books, into long walks that left my legs aching. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't outpace the thoughts that followed me. They were always there, whispering in the back of my mind, reminding me of what had been taken. There were moments, fleeting but potent, when I missed them. Not the person they had turned out to be, but the one I had believed they were. The one who had made me feel understood, valued. That was the cruelest part, grieving someone who had never truly existed. I wondered if they ever thought about me. If, in some quiet moment, they felt even a flicker of regret. Or had I already become just another footnote in their story, a minor inconvenience long forgotten? The thought made my throat tighten. Time passed, as it always does. The sharp edges of the pain dulled, but the weight of it never fully left. It settled into something quieter, a constant companion. I learned to live with it, to make space for it inside me. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to rebuild. Not into the person I was before that version of me was gone, but into someone who had been cracked open and put back together, stronger in the broken places. I still don't have answers. Maybe I never will. But I've come to accept that some betrayals aren't meant to be understood, only survived. And I did survive. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but alive. And that, for now, is enough. The seasons turned. Winter gave way to spring, the world thawing around me as I, too, began to emerge from the numbness. There was no grand moment of clarity, no sudden epiphany, just the slow, steady realization that I was still here. That I had not, as I had feared, been completely erased by their betrayal. I started noticing small things again, the way sunlight filtered through new leaves, the sound of rain against my window, the warmth of a cup of tea in my hands. These were tiny, ordinary comforts, but they anchored me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I also began to write. Not for anyone else, just for myself. Words spilled out of me, messy and unfiltered, a way to untangle the knots inside my chest. I didn't try to shape them into anything meaningful, they just were. And in that act of release, I found a strange kind of peace. I didn't forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I stopped letting the betrayal define me. It was a part of my story, but it wasn't the whole of it. And then, one ordinary afternoon, I caught myself smiling at something, a silly joke, a stray cat weaving between my legs, I don't even remember what. But in that moment, I realized something with startling clarity. I was going to be okay. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But someday. And that was enough to keep going. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It was slow, methodical, like the gradual dimming of a light you hadn't realized was flickering until it was gone. At first, it was small things, missed calls brushed off as forgetfulness, plans canceled last minute with excuses that sounded just plausible enough to quiet the unease in my chest. I told myself I was overthinking, that trust meant giving the benefit of the doubt. But doubt has a way of growing roots, sinking deeper until it's impossible to ignore. Then came the distance. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly became stilted, filled with pauses that stretched too long. I'd catch them staring at their phone with a faint smile, one I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. When I asked, the answer was always the same: nothing, just work, just stress. But the way their eyes darted away told another story. The truth revealed itself in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting a reality I didn't want to see. A name mentioned too casually, a lingering scent that wasn't mine on their clothes, the way they'd pull away when I reached for them. I began to notice the patterns, the lies woven so seamlessly into ordinary moments that I almost admired the skill of it, almost. The night I found out for certain, it wasn't some dramatic confrontation. There were no raised voices, no tears, not then. It was a quiet moment, a misplaced phone left unlocked, a message flashing on the screen that erased any lingering denial. The words were simple, mundane even, but they carried the weight of everything broken between us. I stood there, holding the evidence in my hands, feeling something inside me fracture. I didn't say anything that night. I placed the phone back where I found it and lay awake in the dark, replaying every moment, every excuse, every time I'd pushed my suspicions aside. The betrayal wasn't just in their actions, it was in my own willingness to look away, to pretend I didn't see what was right in front of me. The next morning, they acted as if nothing had changed. Maybe, to them, nothing had. But I could no longer unsee what I knew. The trust was gone, and without it, every word between us felt hollow. I began to withdraw, not out of anger, but from the exhaustion of pretending I didn't feel the rift widening with every passing day. Eventually, the silence between us became too loud to ignore. They asked what was wrong, and for the first time, I didn't soften the truth. I spoke calmly, my voice steady, recounting what I'd seen, what I'd felt. Their face shifted: guilt, then defensiveness, then frustration, as if my acknowledgement of their betrayal was the real offense. We didn't fight. There was no grand ending, no slamming doors. Just the quiet understanding that something between us had irrevocably broken. In the weeks that followed, I grappled with the aftermath not just of their betrayal, but of my own complicity in ignoring the signs. I questioned whether I could have stopped it, whether I should have confronted them sooner. But some wounds run too deep for what-ifs to matter. What stayed with me longest wasn't the anger, though that came in waves. It was the grief for the person I thought they were, for the future I'd imagined, for the version of myself that believed love was enough to keep someone from leaving. Time passed, as it always does. The sharp edges of the pain dulled, but the lesson remained. Betrayal doesn't always come with a knife in the back. Sometimes it's a slow unraveling, a series of choices made in the shadows that you only see when it's too late. And the hardest part isn't the leaving, it's learning to trust yourself again after you've been proven wrong. I still wonder, sometimes, if they ever regretted it. If the lies ever weighed on them the way the truth weighed on me. But that's the thing about betrayal. It's not just about the act itself, but about the aftermath, the way it lingers in the quiet moments, long after the person is gone. And so I move forward, carrying the scars but no longer letting them define me. Because betrayal, as painful as it is, doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can also be the beginning of learning how to choose yourself, even when someone else didn't.